So this is hosted by the Women in Conservation Canterbury Network that's been going for 6 years now, and this is our third International Women's Day event. And it's been great every year. It's been like the highlight of the year, so I think it'll be really great this year as well. The theme for International Women's Day this year was Accelerate Action. And we felt as a network that this was a really great slogan, a great call to arms in terms of moving it from a sort of conversation-based kind of thing of gender equality into sort of action and actually real change. So we're really excited for that as a slogan for the year. Right, a quick little intro to the Women in Conservation Canterbury Network. Like I said, it's been going for 6 years. So it started in 2019, and our whole kind of shtick is about building connections and promoting this drive to gender equality in conservation. So this, as an event, is a really lovely, I think, kind of showcase of our legacy. We've got some founders speaking, and we've got some new undergrads speaking as well. So it's a really nice way of showing the kind of multi-generational, in an academic sense, not an age sense, don't get offended, way that this has kind of got this really lovely legacy and this really lovely testimony to our founders that have started this in 2019. And our mission is sort of to create a safe and supportive space and to encourage, it's all written there, engagement, because I can read it now, like I should know it, but knowledge sharing, capacity building, and also to build this network and build this connection, because we do really believe that through this connection and support and advocacy for each other, we will actually promote change. And we can see that through all of the sort of various success stories that we've seen and a lot of our members and alumni, that some of whom are here tonight and will share our lovely stories. If you'd like to join our network and support in that way, there are a bunch of QR codes. Someone hold it up. There we go. Big hand for Lucy. She did so well. Great. So we've got some QR codes if you'd like to join, but also if you want to support in just being an active listener today, that'd be really great. We're going to have a panel discussion at the end. Also, the panel discussion will not be recorded, so feel free to speak completely freely at that point. And also, if you want to move the movement forward, please continue this conversation beyond 7 p.m. today when we go to Woody's. It is not a 5 to 7 event. The big part of this is to accelerate action in the entirety of your space and your future and in conservation in general.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's a great pleasure to come back to this room where we started, where we had our first ever event for women and WCCN at DICE. So as Kate said, I'm Dominique. I'm extremely proud for this group, for all my time in DICE. And today I want to talk to you about the power of education and mentorship through a little story. So bear with me. I'm going to take you all the way to Mozambique, a complete different setting when we talk about gender equality and women and girls' education. And I bring this quote from my first ever role model, Dr. Wangari Maathai. She said, those of us who have been privileged to receive education, skills, and experience, and even power, must be role models for the next generation of leadership. She said that while she was receiving her Nobel Prize, the first African woman to do so. And for me, this quote resonates so much with people, but also with elephants. Of course, I'll bring elephants to this. Elephants are matriarchal society, and of course they invest so much time and effort teaching the others, passing through intergenerational all the knowledge about the landscape, the risks and the safety, etc. And because they know that one day the youngest will be alone and they will have to survive as well. And it's through my work with elephants that I also came to this realization that we could also be role models, also pass things to other generations. You see, elephants everywhere where they exist in the wild, they are always in proximity with people. And that proximity brings a lot of issues, a lot of challenges, especially human-elephant conflict. And many of us have realized on the ground that without the people who live next door to them, these populations won't really survive for a long time. However, most of these people who live next door are not exactly on the same level as we are. there's a lot of need to look at these places and in this cherry landscape as two sides of the same coin, with people and wildlife, and we need to bring this kind of models. I always talk about local champions of biodiversity conservation, etc. But to do all these, we also need to pay attention to women, the role of women and girls in maintaining these places and maintaining this sustainability and so on. Women and girls activities, daily activities, can either harm or protect the environment and elephants and everything else. But they are often underlooked or overlooked is the English term, overlooked. But they, as I say, they are the ones who make daily decisions that can harm this environment. But good decision making comes with skills, comes with education. And unfortunately, in many places in rural Africa or rural Mozambique, only 3% of girls actually graduate from high school. We might have 90% of children enrolling, but only 3% of girls would graduate. We live in a culture where boys' education is prioritized. And unfortunately, there's a lot of premature wedding or marriages and pregnancies. And of course, you can only imagine all the domino effects that would have for a young girl of 13 to be married and have a first child at 14 and so on. And that's why many of us have identified girls' education as the main force and the main positive change for a better world and conservation of biodiversity in our landscapes. And in Gorongosa National Park, we have the Girls Club, which is an after-school program to help maintain girls in school. In these after-school programs, the girls not only learn more about numeracy, literacy, and other little skills, but they have time to play as well. Because guess what? After school, while the boys might go play soccer, the girls have tons of chores, including fetching water and firewood and so and so. And it's in this club that there's like all our departments, all our programs and work around the park, around trying to protect elephants and wildlife, trying to support the most. I'll say this is our biggest program. And this is what I do as well. What I'm going to present to you, the Role Models Initiative, is just a little sprinkle of what I can do in my program to help support this massive girls' education program that we have in our whole buffer zone. And also, I am a passionate advocate of girls' education, and it's thanks to my education as someone as well, like me, from Mozambique, that is today able to contribute to elephant conservation through this. So I use elephant as emblematic species to help inspire these girls. How? I used to visit these clubs. When we had these clubs, when we started, I was always very curious. We were all giving a lot of inputs on it. And my colleague and friend at the time, Larissa, she said, "Why don't you come and visit?" So I went there to visit, and she basically threw me to the group, to the girls, and said, "Talk to them." And I was terrified. I was super shy. The girls were even more shy. And then I remembered that I had my phone with, of course, elephant pictures and other things. And of course, after they saw the picture and we started to talk, you could just see the change in their eyes. And then I started to visit more and more and more. But at that time, I was also still doing a PhD here. So it was not as consistent as we wanted to be. And it took me some time until I found some good donors to embark with me on this crazy idea. Because, I thought, it shouldn't be only me. You see, Gorongosa has a lot of women who does amazing work. We have an army of amazing role models that we could be used to inspire the girls. So I started with the role models brochure. And the way I started, I called for nominations, basically, to senior management. And I said, I would like you guys to decide which of my colleagues would be a good role model for, girls' clubs, etc. I thought I would have 5 or 10. I had more than 20. And then I noticed that when I visit the clubs in rural Mozambique, there was a lot of ice, and was really shy and timid. But when I did that in other countries, like in the States, the girls were on top of me. They knew everything. They had amazing questions. Some that I still don't know how to answer. So I realized that it's because they were exposed to me and my work before. They were reading about me and so on. And that's why we started with a brochure. In this brochure, you'd have girls or women that broke barriers of society, that broke poverty barriers, that they have high education, and they're showing how women can contribute even for conservation. So all these role models, we are actually challenging the conceptions of the role of women around the protected area and in a protected area. And you'd see women like Lorena, that is a scientist, or Maria, where she's one of the rangers, one of my colleagues. And in this test, they're not just telling about her story and how the challenge she had and etc., but also she has a little advice for the girls and so on. And even our amazing cook from the cantina, without whom we wouldn't survive, she's still there. So these girls receive these brochures and these clubs, and they take home, because we want them to share with their siblings, with their parents, to have a little read when they want, and etc. And after that, we do role model surprise visits to these clubs. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't. This is Julinda, and she showed up in Bebedo Community Girls Club, and you can see in one of the brochures, she is an ornithologist, and she has a picture with a battler eagle. And so the girls love it, that too. Or the girls come to the place of work when possible. So this is in Chitengo, and we have a rehabilitation, pangolin rehab center, and this is Mercia, our vet. And in this day, the girls actually named the pangolin after their club. So that is Murumbuzi, the pangolin. When possible, we take them to a safari as well, and they enjoy the park with us. What's her name? Dadiva behind me there. She's a tourist guide, and she is also a role model, part of this brochure. And of course, you can imagine how crazy logistics all that is, but we make sure it works. This is, for example, the most recent interaction that was last year's on the International Day of the Girl Child. We had a massive activity in the park, and of course the role models are part of fairs, and they compete with each other to see who is the coolest, who will attract more girls. And I have to say, I say girls clubs, but we also have boys in there now, because we noticed that the boys would be by the shade of the tree wondering, what are the girls doing, what are they looking so cool. So for example, this is another activity we do, and I have to say that this is already the second edition of this role models brochure. The first time was hard, but then the second time everyone wanted to support. And at this moment, I have to say as well that when I thought about this idea, I was only focused on the girls, thinking about girls' education, girls' club. But one of indirect and very positive result we had was the motivation that it got to the role models. My colleagues are in the clouds now, to be seen, recognized with their work in the department, to have the girls say, I want to be like you when I grow up, and know them by name, and they have the brochures and etc. It completely changed. And that's why now I am leveling up, and I'm going to focus as well, not only the brochures and the girls, but also more capacity development for the role model. So if anyone has any ideas of how to do that, because I believe that once we are better professionals, we'll be better role models as well, and that will trickle down. So if anyone has any idea for workshops or training for women to be, whatever area it might be, it doesn't have to be super specific, please, let's talk, because I'm on the lookout for it now. And as I was saying, they become also mentors. This is one of my role models, Antonia, and she was one of the pioneers using the famous beehive fences for coexistence with elephants, and now she was training other women and men as well in the community. And I have to say, beekeeping for women is really taboo, is really difficult in our communities, but there she is. She has now 30 women also joining because of seeing her and seeing what she's doing. I also had a lot of mentors. Some are not even in this picture, but to start from when I started with elephants, and my continuous director threw me to the fire all the time, and my last one, Dr. Greta Yori. But besides all that, I understand how mentorship can actually help. And I started doing it without even notice. And I want to highlight these two women here. One is Margarida Vitor. doing camera traps with me. Another one is Mercia, getting ready a Ziploc while I collect really important sample from an elephant. And Mercier is a vet, but the news is that, for example, Margarida, since we started in 2018, Mercia since 2019, Margarida is now, she just went to do her PhD in GIS in Ireland. And Mercia, today we got the news that she got awarded a veterinary scholarship in the Royal Veterinary School in London, and I am a mentor, so I'm really, really happy about this. And it's just an example of, you know, the power of women and bringing others together and keeping the doors open. So far, I have distributed 3,500 brochures to 70 girls clubs, and I still have 5,000 to go. So any contribution, any support is really, really welcome. And thank you.
I'm Kate, nice to meet you all. As Kate said, I'm the Science and Policy Manager for the Wildlife Programme at the RSPCA. So I will be branching, it's not going forward. What do I press? Okay, there we go. And I'll be talking to you today about women in leadership. So, I'll talk a little bit about my current role and what I'm doing as, I'd say, an early woman leader. And we'll look a bit at the current landscape of leadership. What does it look like for women? And the challenges we are facing as people who want to progress in our respective fields. And I'm going to touch on something called the motherhood penalty, because this really does play into it. It's something to be aware of, whether you are planning on having families or not. And then I want to end on a bit of a positive, empowering note and talk a bit about how we can accelerate action and what you can all do, maybe as a part of that. So I'm Science and Policy Manager, so this means that I manage the portfolio of work to do with wildlife management at the RSPCA. So mainly that involves how we tackle bovine TB in badgers and cattle. So we're talking specifically about badger culling. I work on trail hunting, so they're fairly contentious, polarized, politically difficult topics. And I'm working on consolidating wildlife law across England and Wales and developing a research strategy for the Wildlife Department. So the RSPCA, you think cats and dogs. We do a lot of work with wildlife. We are part of the Animal Science Directorate. The RSPCA is a powerhouse of animal science specialists, many postdocs and research professionals. And I'd say that as far as welfare and conservation goes, we probably take more of a compassionate conservation approach. So in that sense, we look at things like the welfare of individual animals, which in this context is probably more relevant when you're looking at declining or very low populations of endangered species, in which case the threshold of consideration for the welfare of individuals goes up. So if you look at it that way, that's really where compassionate conservation comes in for us. I manage 2 direct reports, the Senior Scientific Policy Officer, Verity, who has just had her Viva today with David MacDonald on badgers, and she passed with flying colours, and Verity manages our rescue and rehabilitation work, and I manage Rebecca, who's our Science and Policy Officer, who oversees our information and dissemination work on wild animal welfare. I also deputise for Dr. Rod's Club, who's on the left. She's our head of wildlife. And this was us, this is a few people from our team this week at Parliament. So we were lobbying about 40 MPs as part of our Developing Act for Wildlife campaign. So this is part of the wildlife law reform work, which really focuses on battling for tougher, more effective wildlife laws. So relevant to you guys, if anyone's working in UK-based conservation, things like the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which a lot of the laws we work with are outdated, they're insufficient, and they weren't actually established for the protection of wild animals. So we're looking to change that. So if I could summarise my journey as a woman leader in 4 photos, these would be it. This is me at DICE on the left. I finished my PhD about 3 years ago. And I was in the Belum rainforest in Peninsular Malaysia doing my work with the orang asli on Malayan tigers. 2 of my field team are here, just to the right. And then about a year ago, my life changed drastically, and I became a mama. And then my delicious little potato is on the right. This is Robin, and he has just turned a year. So Ali and I, we had Robin, and we're in Cambridge, and I entered this new role, or adopted this new role, in addition to being a woman scientist. What did that look like? That's a good question. Well, I'm going to start by talking about the current landscape of leadership rather than myself, and then I'll bring my own experiences into it a little bit more. So for women, just 15% of executive directors across the FTSE 350, so this is a group of very prominent businesses, just 15% of those executive directors are female. In the charity sector, the pay gap has increased to 14.4%, and that's the highest it's been in over 10 years. For you guys, the higher education sector gender pay gap is even higher, 14.8%, and almost a quarter of vice-chancellors and university presidents in the UK are women. But it does vary. So women are overrepresented in, actually I don't like the word overrepresented. Women are more prominent, let's say, in the leadership of smaller charities, and I also see that, mainly with female directors and chief executives for NGOs. But male chief execs are continuing to dominate the leadership of larger organisations, so it does vary. But what are the challenges we face as women in terms of leadership when we want to progress in our respective fields? So some of you may find these things familiar. Some of you women may find these things familiar. So we face what's called the career window and the rush hours of life. So you enter the age of 31 to 40, which is my age bracket, and you're immediately faced with a question, perhaps. Maybe people are asking you those questions, perhaps. Those annoying questions. Oh, so when you're moving in together, when you're settling down, when you're having children, men probably don't get asked those questions as much. Maybe they do. But for women, we are instantly faced with those decisions and those pressures, either that we feel ourselves, that we have to start thinking about, or a societal pressure because other people are thinking about it as well. For men, it's different. So it stays wide open. This window is open between 31 to 50 and beyond. Now, roughly half of all promotions, about 47%, happen for women in that age bracket. And this clashes with that time when we do start thinking about family. We may decide we want to have children, maybe we don't. But if we do, up to 70% of all family care responsibilities are still shouldered by women, and that's women who are working full-time, equally to their male counterparts, as I do with Ali. We both work full-time. And we start coming across things like the maybe baby bias, and some women in the room might be familiar with this. So we start feeling those biases that run throughout society, that women are a riskier choice. We're potentially a pregnancy inconvenience. Men are potentially the safer option. I know 2 mothers in Cambridge who are actively experiencing this now. One of them, her boss is a woman. And it's not something that necessarily just women who have children or are thinking about children face. These biases and these assumptions are there for women, whether you decide to have children or not. And I think that's a really important point to make. These things that people think of when they employ women or when they see women as potential employees, very generally speaking, are the biases that are the undercurrent to our society and a lot of the assumptions that employers make. And this takes me on to something called the motherhood pay gap or the motherhood penalty. So this is defined as mothers who are perceived as being unfit leaders. They are perceived as being less competent. They are less committed to their careers. As a result of that, they might receive lower salaries and they're denied those opportunities to progress. Now, this statistic was taken from a study in Denmark, so I don't know how replicable it is here. But the motherhood penalty makes up about 80% of the gender pay gap. That's insane. So just think about that for a moment. The gender pay gap between men and women, 80% of that is felt more by mothers. So that means that not only do women have to deal with this inequality and this disparity between them and their male counterparts, if you decide to become a mother, you are also tackling that added layer of bias. This is what research is showing us. It means that as a woman, if you decide to be a mother, you are having to then tackle those underlying assumptions and probably those subconscious biases that even other women have, just because we dared to have a baby. So this is, I think, a really powerful line to add, and I came across this by the founder of a great charity called Pregnant Then Screwed. I'd encourage everyone in the room to look it up. You laugh. There's some really powerful research in that. But it's really, really true. So what does that mean for us who do decide to be mothers? Well, the motherhood penalty, to summarise it, sorry, the text is really small. So we give birth, we have babies. Mothers, we tend to turn to either part-time roles, flexible working. We want to have a working life or a condition that we need for our family life. We want to be with our babies. We've just had amazing potatoes and they're bizarre and incredible. But often, because of those choices, it means lower wages. Because of those choices, employers often see part-time workers as inflexible, as more fussy, less productive, less committed. What does that mean? That women then maybe receive fewer promotion opportunities, less bonuses. They are also having to shoulder the cost of higher childcare. Now, to put it, everyone sees or hears news stories about the cost of childcare, and it probably sounds really boring. Ali and I, in a year, Robin's in nursery for 3 days a week now, we pay over £14,000 a year in childcare. That's the same as private school fees for a child. It's insane. Now, if you think if you're a single mother, maybe you're a mother who was full-time but went part-time, you find yourself in a situation you can't afford to do that. So you go back into this, okay, well, I have to work part-time. I have other friends who are in similar situations. And you find yourself in this cycle that's really, really hard to break out of because of the inconvenience or the perceived inconvenience of women who want to be mothers or are mothers. So how can we accelerate the action on this? What can we change? Challenge the norm, and every single person in this room can play a part in this. So things might be improving in some sectors. There are policies in place. There are petitions that run in some organisations. I'm actively challenging a policy at the RSPCA now about flexible working. But attitudes need to change too. Now, these biases are existing, whether you think it's true or not, whether you've come across them or not. They are there. They're an undercurrent. Whether you're a woman that chooses to have a child or not, those biases are there. So whether you decide to have a baby, people will already be assuming these things about you or your potential. Those things are there, and that's the reality. That's what research is showing us. So those underlying attitudes about women and their employability, even if they become mothers or not, that needs to change, and you need to decide what works for you off the back of that. So I decided that I wanted to have a flexible working arrangement. I work 4 days a week, full-time hours, so they're fairly long days. It's really tiring. But actually that's best for me because I get those really long, unbroken stretches of focus time to do the work that requires that. Anyone doing PhD and things, you need unbroken analysis time, reading time. You need that time when no one talks to you, everyone go away. And that's what works for me. And you need to find your allies. So people in this room who are studying, think about your supervisors, your PIs, your heads of department. Would they actively elevate you if you went to them and said, do you know what? I don't care what the policy says, this is what I need. Challenge that norm, and that's what needs to happen more and more to crush those biases, because they are very much alive. I had Jim as my supervisor, he was brilliant, and I'm pretty sure if I went to Jim, and Jim would go, oh my Jesus Christ, it's her again. But also he would listen, and I have absolutely no doubt he would always listen to me and hear me out and try and help me find a way forward. Look for those people and make sure that they do elevate you. And don't be afraid to speak up. I'm requesting my trial period. We're challenging the RSPCA. We're fighting the current policy. They are reviewing that policy because of that, because I think that no mother or father should have to suffer or compromise what they feel will work for them and their ability to progress in their field as leaders. And think about what a career means to you. So I'm also a fellow of a program called Leaders Plus, and this is for parents and especially women to equip them with the skills and the confidence to challenge the norm. And one thing we learned the other day is it's something like 60 or 65% of people, if you actually write down your vision of what you want to see, so write down your vision for what you see as a family in 5 or 10 years. It might be hard for those of you who are just setting out in your studies and you're just not thinking about that. But that's okay. Think about 5 or 10 years' time. Write down what you want to see for your family and what you want to see for your career. And it's something like 60 or 65% of people who do that, you're more likely to achieve those goals because you're actually acknowledging them and you start mentally setting out those milestones to get there. And think about what that looks for you and what you want. And be really, really clear about that, and don't be afraid to assert yourself in wanting that. And this idea about authority as a leader, we think of leaders as people who kind of, steamroll ahead and they have this sense of authority and, maybe I sound like I have authority now because I'm speaking quite loudly and you don't know how I'm feeling. Maybe I'm feeling really nervous. Maybe I wasn't quite sure about giving this talk and I needed a pint. But the idea that we all have that sense of authority, and think about what that means. Does it mean you're an expert? Yes. Does it mean that you have a voice? Absolutely. Does it mean that you can find that confidence in yourself to actually say what you want? Yes. Authority means lots of things. We all have imposter syndrome, and as leaders, they have it all the time. Jesus Christ, people are just much better at hiding it. That's all it is. And push for that much more flexible, inclusive career path for all genders, and I think that's a really important point. This is shit for guys as well. Guys cannot take more than 2 weeks paternity leave unless the company policy is better than that, which I think Cambridge University, Al just missed out on it. He took the standard 2 weeks paternity leave. And that was it. There is shared options in terms of flexible working, but it needs to be much, much better. And if women and men can share that difference in childcare, then it means that women are far more equipped to be able to confidently make those choices and those decisions and state very clearly without worrying about the repercussions about what they need. And I think I just want to end on the fact that remember that women are powerhouses. Mothers are powerhouses of information and ability to do the job really, really well. Research shows that when you become a mother, you are more emotionally intelligent, you are more robust, you are more equipped to deal with very difficult people. You are dealing with a very small, difficult person at home all the time, and that's not just dad. And you're an absolute powerhouse. And don't underestimate how strong mothers are, because we are equipped. We have to be equipped, and I'm looking at Javi. We have changed emotionally, physically, physiologically, mentally. It's an enormous shift that we go through. And to carry all of that and be leaders, we are more than capable of, but we need a system that changes and we need allies in all of you to enable us to do that. Look at these resources. Fawcett Society has some amazing research, which is quite eye-opening. Pregnant and Screwed is great, and also Leaders Plus is the program I mentioned as a fellow, and that supports parents, but particularly women, in progressing in leadership roles. And they have an amazing podcast, which I would definitely recommend listening to. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. So I'm Sophie O'Connor. I'm a first year PhD student here at DICE, and I'm one of two Sophies talking to you about agriculture today. My specific work focuses on, there we go. Cool. Yeah, my specific work focuses on farm women in England and how they connect with climate change or not. So I'm going to start just by talking about the problem that a lot of people are trying to address, including myself, and that is that, as I'm sure you're all aware, agriculture is responsible for 12% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see from the light blue line, which is pretty much horizontal, it is also the slowest sector to decarbonise. Theoretically, we do have the knowledge, the resources, the technology to speed up that transition, to speed up that decarbonisation. And with that in mind, the government has put in place a lot of subsidies to support that transition and to support more pro-environmental practices on farms. But despite that, less than half of farmers in England have signed up to the government's flagship agri-environmental scheme. For me, this implies that for farmers, it's not just about money, although obviously it has a really important part to play, it is a business. And that begs questions about why aren't farmers engaging in agri-environmental behaviours and what can be done to remedy that? And obviously there's loads of research out here looking at this, it's not a secret among researchers. And there's been a lot of really good insights on that. But for me personally, I think a lot of this research misses out on a key piece of the puzzle. And that is that lots of these studies will only interview one person, and it's usually a man in his capacity as primary farmer. But the thing is that in England and in the UK more broadly, most farms are family farms. So they get passed down from generation to generation. Children are raised on the farms and often learn the trade early. And you often have sometimes 3 or even 4 generations living on site. The farm is not just a business, it is a home. And on top of that, the 55% of the agricultural workforce is made up of family members. So it really implies to me that farming isn't just a job, it is a lifestyle that these people live and breathe 365 days a year. So when we're asking questions about how a farm is run, we can't just look at one person in the farm business. We have to look at the complex web of actors that's involved in that. So that's parents who perhaps previously ran the farm, you have children who will succeed the farm one day, you have spouses, you have all sorts of actors on there, and they need to be considered too. And as well as this, a lot of the research is gender blind, so even where women are present in the participant sample, gender tends not to even be mentioned. And that means that if there are any nuances to how men and women approach agri-environmentalism, the research will not pick up on that. Which leads to my research on farm women. And just to be clear, when I'm talking about farm women, I'm referring to any self-identifying woman who lives on, owns, or manages a farm. And crucially, she doesn't have to work in the farm business. That would exclude grandmothers, farmers' wives, daughters, whatever, all of whom are really key actors in the family farm dynamic. Additionally, the term female farmers disregards women who just help out on the farm, even if that involves night shifts during lambing season or cooking regular meals for seasonal workers. More often than not, these helpers make significant contributions to the farm, yet they don't consider themselves proper farmers and they're not financially compensated for their efforts. Because of this, farm women are all but invisible in the research and in the public eye. And that means that farm women are woefully understudied. We know very little about them or their role on the farm or what they do, but here's what we do know. In 2016, only 16% of farm holders were female, yet they accounted for around 55% of the family workforce. What that implies to me is that women are very likely to work on a farm but not own or manage the land, or hold the formal decision-making powers that come with such ownership. Secondly, due to financial pressures on farms, especially in the wake of things like Brexit, many are being forced to diversify their offerings by setting up campsites, converting the land into solar parks, setting up farm shops, that kind of thing. And more often than not, that farm diversification is spearheaded by women. So even if they're not contributing to the traditional farm model by ploughing fields or rearing livestock, they're still really active in keeping the farm afloat. A particular nuance of the family farm model is that if a woman is in off-farm employment, often that income will go back into the farm because, again, the farmhouse is part of the farm. So even if she doesn't work on or have a legal claim to the farm, she makes significant financial contributions to it. And finally, patrilineal inheritance, which is the act of passing a business from father to son, is still the norm in many parts of England and the UK more broadly. Because of this, men remain firmly in the driving seat, at least on paper, and that means that they have all sorts of say on the direction, including agri-environmental decisions. And my research seeks to develop this very limited understanding of farm women. So let's talk a little bit about my research. So it all kicked off when I did my master's here in 2022 to 23. And my master's dissertation, which was a 2-month project, kind of acted as a pilot project for my PhD. And basically what I was looking at is how Kentish farmers engage with climate change. I was really curious about what their perspective was on the climate crisis and whether they were changing their farming practices in response to it. And if not, why not? I conducted this through participant observation and semi-structured interviews with 12 participants, so really tiny sample size, but again, 2-month project, so pretty small. But the reality is that I actually interacted with wives, children, employees, all that sort of thing of my participants as well. And that unplanned interaction is actually what tuned me into this idea that farm household members can actually be a really important part of the farm business model. And while I didn't go into the field intending to focus on gender, that's kind of where the data took me. Seeing how mostly male farmers interacted with their wives and with their kids, and seeing how interwoven the farm business and the farmhouse were, it became really clear to me that we needed to broaden our understanding of who is involved in farms. And these are just some of my key findings. Please also note the cute dog. So firstly, I found that farm women were incredibly concerned about climate change, often more so than their male partners. And moreover, they were really keen to engage in pro-environmental behaviours, but they tended to shy away from official channels like the National Farmers Union or local subsidies or local political structures. Instead, and I think this is pretty interesting, they set up their own channels. So one lady, she published a conservation newsletter and distributed it locally. Another set up a birding group. And one even set up a whole intra-farm environmental action group. So she was working not only on her own farm, but with neighbouring farms to ensure there was a cohesive environmental policy and that their hard work was not offsetting each other, which I thought was really cool. And importantly, all of these actions were done off their own backs. They weren't asked to do any of this in their spare time, often in addition to full-time work and usually caring responsibilities, and without being paid or having any resources to put towards this other than their own time and energy. I also found that in line with broader research findings, women tended to lead farm diversification projects. I have lost my place. Cool. Oh yeah, they were less involved in the farm as a business. And this idea, obviously it's a tiny sample size, certainly not conclusive. But I think what I observed is that on the whole, this distance from the farm business enabled women to take a more holistic approach to the farm, consider other issues like environmental concerns. And finally, I found that while most of these women had little or no formal power on the farms because they didn't own it or they weren't the formal farm manager, that doesn't mean they didn't have influence. And I think this is really exemplified by the intra-farm environmental action group that I mentioned, because I actually interviewed a few of the farmers that had signed up to it. And they all spoke very highly of the woman who'd organised it. They all had deep respect for her and for her environmental aims and for her knowledge as well, even if they didn't identify as environmentalists themselves. And the bottom line is that this woman, due to her influence in the community, was able to change those behaviours even among men who didn't identify as environmentalists. And I think that could be really significant. The bottom line for me is that after my fieldwork, I felt like I'd stumbled across a potential group of environmental allies. These were people who are already embedded in the farming community with a deep care for the environment and who are often using their power to protect it already. And it just made me wonder, what else are these farm women up to? Is this a trend among farm women more broadly? Or did I just stumble across an anomaly? And if this is a trend, what would happen if we gave them resources? And that is essentially what my PhD project is about. So I'm going to be using a blend of life histories and semi-structured interviews with farm women, initially across Kent, just to try and understand what their role is in the farmhouse, in the farm business, and how that could inform agri-environmental policy. It's early days. I'm hoping to go out into the field maybe next month. So watch this space. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophie Jago, and for the last few years I've been working on a project with Ethiopian farmers to improve food security through conserving agrobiodiversity. As conservationists, we often only think about the importance of conserving wild biodiversity. But agrobiodiversity consists of the subset of biodiversity that we as humans depend on most, and conserving it helps to reduce the risk of food systems to shocks. This is because different species and varieties have different traits and adaptations that make them better suited to different conditions, meaning farmers can essentially spread their risk and avoid putting all of their eggs in one basket. Ethiopia is an agrobiodiversity hotspot, meaning it contains some of the highest levels of crop diversity globally. However, Ethiopia is also one of the most food insecure countries globally, ranking 102nd out of 127 countries on the Global Hunger Index. And within this, there are also major inequalities. In particular, food insecurity has been found to be much worse in female-headed households compared to the national estimate. In our project, we've focused on the nationally important crop enset, which is known locally as the tree against hunger, and is a staple food for over 20 million people in Ethiopia. Most of you probably won't have heard of enset, as it's only ever been domesticated in Ethiopia, but you will have definitely heard of its cousin, the banana. Enset is often referred to as the wild banana or the giant banana, and the major difference between the two crops is that with enset you use every part of the plant except for the fruit. The underground corm is pulverized and fermented into a pit to make the daily staple starch product kocho. The stem is scraped to extract fibres used to make rope for building houses, and the midrib is fed to cattle as fodder. The leaves are also used for roofing and seating. Processing enset to get all of these products is a difficult task, which is predominantly carried out by female farmers. Here's a short video. There are hundreds of different varieties of enset with different traits, such as being more drought or disease tolerant, having different tastes, and some even having medicinal value. Some of these traits are not the best adapted for current day conditions, but they may become important in the future, so conserving them now helps to ensure food production can be sustainable long term. All of this diversity is currently maintained by smallholder farmers who are providing a global good. However, this diversity is slowly being lost as farmers face significant pressures to switch to intensive farming or crops such as maize or even cash crops. These are all less resilient to environmental shocks compared to diverse traditional crops. To help conserve this NSET diversity, we've been implementing a scheme called Payments for Agrobiodiversity Conservation Services, or PACS. This is a concept that's very similar to the more well-known Payments for Ecosystem Services, but it instead provides incentives for farmers to maintain rare varieties of agrobiodiversity. This gives farmers a viable option to sustain traditional agricultural practices while improving their livelihoods through more fairly distributing the costs and benefits for conserving agrobiodiversity. PACs can also be adapted to incorporate social equity criteria, for example, ensuring fair participation of female and elderly farmers. PACs has already been implemented in over 150 communities, mainly in South America, where it's been shown to provide both cost-effective and equitable conservation for rare agrobiodiversity. For the first phase of this project, we needed to identify which of the many varieties of NSET were rarest and most in need of conservation effort. To do this, we used local knowledge through community focus group discussions to identify the different varieties grown in the region and whether each of these was grown by many or few farmers in each community and in large or small quantities. Surveying 22 communities consisting of over 500 farmers, we identified 175 unique varieties and calculated the average rarity score across the communities. Here you can see the spread of rarity for communities in two separate locations, and in both of these, the majority of NSET varieties were considered to be endangered, with a total of 59 in this category. We chose to focus our conservation effort on these. We then needed to understand what level of incentive is required to offset the opportunity costs of maintaining these rarer varieties. To do this, we held workshops with elected community leaders, requiring there to be both a male and a female leader from each community. These workshops encouraged the community leaders to consider their community's specific opportunity costs and talk them through the process where they would put in bid offers stating which of the rare landraces they wanted to conserve and what incentive they would be willing to accept to conserve it. To improve gender equality in the project, we role-played scenarios to demonstrate how the selection would work, not only selecting as many offers as we could for the budget, but also incorporating social equity criteria, such as ensuring at least 50% of the offers selected were from female farmers, even if this meant conserving fewer NSET varieties. All 22 communities chose to submit bid offers, and these included offers for 52 of the 59 rare varieties. We were able to confirm that communities had understood the idea of opportunity cost, as the prices offered differed for different varieties even within the same communities. In particular, the variety which required the highest incentive by far was Epo. Epo is wild NSET, which is important for conservation because of its genetic diversity, but it's not edible, so it makes sense that it should be the most expensive to grow on farm. Through the selection process, we prioritised offers from communities which had more female participants, while also selecting those that were lower cost and maximising the number of landraces that we were conserving. Overall, 15 communities were selected to participate, growing 44 of the rare varieties between them. We then provided the communities with the planting material of their selected rare varieties to grow, and they were given a year to propagate and grow them into saplings, which could then be divided up among the community. You can see some photos of the process here. We then repeated the rarity surveys with each participating community to see what had changed, and found that the project had been extremely successful at improving the rarity status of NSET varieties. For example, Semi and Bench Genja community had 4 of their bid offers selected, so were growing 4 different rare landraces. They not only improved the status of these 4, but also an extra 11. Tesfanesh, the lady wearing a yellow t-shirt here, told us, "We are very thankful for this project. We'd lost a number of landraces, but we're now able to gain them back. Seeing from the survey that we'd improved a lot makes us so happy." We saw similar results across all of the communities. So in summary, the scheme paid to improve the status of 44 varieties, but we saw improvement in 92. Here you can see the bubbles representing the number of varieties in each rarity category before the project at the top and after the project below. There's a shift in most being endangered and locally extinct to much more being just threatened, vulnerable and least concern. The final phase was providing the compensation. All of the communities successfully grew the agreed upon rare varieties, so we held reward ceremonies to celebrate their success and to provide the agreed upon incentives. All the incentives were provided through in-kind payments, using items selected by the communities. The majority chose items such as farming tools, exercise books, blankets and solar lamps. I'll just finish up with a couple of testimonials from some of the project participants. Degade Kiro said, "We really appreciate the efforts you're showing to help us secure food security. We will be propagating more ENSA and will share them with communities that don't have them. We think this is a really positive indicator that the benefits of the project will continue longer term." The communities also appreciated our efforts to try and improve gender equality. And Kaspanesh Mapira said, "Before, women were not invited to this kind of project. We want to thank this project for respecting us and inviting us to participate." This project was made possible thanks to the funding from the Ellis Goodman Family Foundation, as well as the hard work of my amazing team, Beswick Gananor, Asamnu Walder-Gabriel, Wendawa Kabebe, Adam Drucker and James Burrell. If you'd like to find out some more about the project, then there's a QR code to our blog here, or feel free to email me with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, we've both done our undergraduate dissertation projects in some way linked to gender. So we thought it would be cool to come and talk to you a little bit about what we've done. I apologise for those of you that are hearing my talk for the second, potentially third time. Sorry, Jim. But I'll try and rattle through so you can hear Ursula's awesome research as well. Okay, so my project, I've looked at the impact of personal characteristics on training success, and more specifically gender and country of origin. So I want to know, does who you are and where you come from actually impact what you gain from conservation training? And hopefully that can give us more insight into how we should be targeting opportunities for people based on who they are and where they come from, or if we should be targeting at all. So I had a look into conservation training more broadly, and there were 4 key themes that sort of stuck out to me in the literature. The idea of conservation as a profession. So as a sector, we haven't traditionally been very professionalised. If you look at ecology or zoology, there is a lot more in terms of professional bodies to support support those professionals, but conservation lacks that. And we've got a risk at the moment that by professionalising conservation, we're actually going to promote exclusivity rather than bringing more people into the sector. Through that, we've also got links into EDI and conservation. Should we be training women to help them just exist in inequitable organisations, or should we be training them and giving them opportunities that bring them into the room? Capacity building is something we hear all the time in conservation. We know that as capacity increases, we get better conservation outcomes. So we should be putting the same amount of energy into ensuring people have the skills as a means of capacity building to improve outcomes. And also the idea of continuous training and impact monitoring in order to achieve conservation success. We all know that how we measure success in conservation is really sort of debated. And so maybe we should be looking at the way that we train conservationists and their outcome as a measure of conservation success. So I worked with the Durrell Conservation Academy on this project, which was super exciting. We took participants from their Desmond and ESR courses. So that was a mix of people that have never been in conservation before, maybe are career switching, are early career conservationists, and also people that are just looking to expand their skills in the career they already have. And these participants took part in pre- and post-training surveys and were asked to rate their skills on a Likert scale, because this could be anything from their understanding of how to write a grant proposal to their GIS skills, so a mix of technical and soft skills in conservation. And we wanted to analyse the relationship between their gender, country of origin, and these survey responses. So I focused on 2 question themes, so the idea of overcoming challenges in your work and your confidence in being able to make a difference in conservation. And this was with the mindset that someone could have the best technical skills in the world, but if they don't feel confident or have the self-belief to apply them, then how much use actually are they? And we took our response variables as if someone recorded an increase in their confidence, that was a positive impact. And if it stayed the same or decreased, we took that as a not a positive impact. And then based on country of origin, we used World Bank classifications as another variable. And that table there gives you an idea of our participant sample. So we had 166 participants from a number of different countries. We ran a binomial logistic regression and found that gender and country of origin had no significant impact on self-reported training outcomes. And initially I was like, uh-oh, my predictions were wrong, this is all bad, it's terrible. But actually, looking into this more, it was more of a realization that we don't necessarily need to focus on who we're training based on the outcomes they get. So we don't need to train all of the men or all of the women or everyone from a high-income country because they get more out of it. Actually, we know that the training is impactful and we should be focusing on ensuring we get those people into the room. And also the idea, again, that we should be improving access to training opportunities for all. So what is it that's impacting people from being able to get access to these opportunities? And so I suggested that as a result of this, maybe we should be shifting our monitoring and evaluation of training programs. So what elements of training actually allow us to have this reach for people from a range of backgrounds? How are we able to capture an impact for women and men and people from high and low income backgrounds? Does your training background and career background have a bigger influence on training and whether it's successful for you? And are there other barriers impacting participants from from accessing training? So is it that a course is online and you don't have access to internet? Or is it that all of the training is in one part of the world and you don't have access to that training? Is it language barriers? We all know that we've got a slight bias in publications between the global north and south, and are we seeing the same in training? And it's also very important that I make it clear that there were many limitations to study. We know that self-reporting in surveys is tricky. I initially had a sample size of about 300 to 350 people, but no one likes to fill out a survey, so that dramatically decreased to 166 people. So if you're ever on a course and you're asked to do a survey, please complete both of them. We also know that the sample might not be representative of the whole industry. This is just people that are seeking training. So are those people already more motivated and likely to get things out of the training? And many respondents, as I said, weren't included due to the incompletion of surveys or missing personal characteristics. Something I've encountered is there's a lot of controversy about whether we should be recording people's nationality or the country of origin. What tells us more? Is it who you are or where you come from that matters more? And the questions I selected didn't display significance, but I wonder if this was repeated again, whether skill-specific questions would show a difference. So we've looked purely at soft skills and confidence and self-belief, and if we measured something like GIS or RStudio or the ability to write a grant proposal, would we see something slightly different? But what's really exciting is this is part of a bigger project being undertaken by Emily Smith. She's doing a PhD on this project, and she's looking at everything from career background to skill-specific questions. So hopefully she'll have more to share on this as well, which is really exciting. Yeah, go for it.
So what I'm going to talk to you about today is really away from what I've done at the university, but more what I've done with the British Ornithologists Union, BOU, in organising a lot of events, mostly conferences, over the last kind of 4 or 5 years. And what we are learning when organising these conferences and also reading the literature is that women really participate less and engage less in scientific events, mostly conferences, even in fields which are gender balanced, and even at events which are attended equally by men and women. They compared attendance to endocrinological conferences across 2 years, and they simply observed how many questions at the conference are asked by men and women. And here you can see women in blue, men in green, and hopefully you can see that's a huge statistically significant difference. There is a bit of an increase between 2017 and 2018, and I'll explain why that is in a bit. Another very interesting observation is that when comparing how men and women ask questions by timing them, it appears that men take a much longer and statistically significant amount of time asking those questions. So you could say that there's a bit of male domination of when it comes to asking questions. And this isn't the only study showing this. Here's another one, a more recent one. Here we are looking at conferences which are all male and all white, which I think is quite amazing to actually see that. But there we go. In those conferences or in those rooms, after the average talk, there were 5 questions asked of the speaker. When we move to a male and female audience, all white, we are jumping up to an average of 12 to 13 questions. And then if we have males and females and not completely wide audience, we jump up to almost 20 questions being asked after presentations, with everything else being the same in terms of time for questions. And this is because different people think differently and therefore ask different questions. The same study noted down some questions which were posed by men and women, and they gave out those questions without disclosing whether they were asked by a man or woman to a load of independent markers. And those markers were asked to categorize what they thought of those questions. And questions posed by females were very often described as more polite and insightful and phrased in a more empathetic way, which doesn't mean that questions from males are bad, but it just shows that we need a diversity of approaches. And so the other graph, don't worry about what the colors mean, but just look at the variety of colors, because what we're seeing is that, again, when we have a diverse audience of genders, but also backgrounds, we get more different types of questions being asked. So why does this happen? Well, often because women scientists are not visible. Same applies to other minority groups. And this kind of takes us back all the way to how we bring up women and people in our society. So this study from 24 went into schools and asked children, quite young children, to draw a scientist. 35% of those drawings were of female scientists. Over 50% were of male scientists. However, the positive news is that the older the kids were, the more likely they were to draw a female scientist or a scientist that didn't exhibit any gender stereotypical characteristics, which indicates that the more we expose children to a variety of scientists as they grow older, the more likely they are to change the schema of what a scientist looks like. And a similar kind of study, I find this one is like one of the best studies I've ever heard of, is showing the power of stereotypes. So in our society, we often condition children to what they should or shouldn't be doing. And often girls get conditioned that they are not adequate enough to be as good as boys in certain subjects, which often includes science. To measure this, scientists presented this picture to boys and girls across several classes. The children were asked to observe this picture for 1.5 minutes and then to reproduce the picture within a 5-minute window. There were 2 groups. One group of boys and girls were told that this is a geometry task, and the other group was told that this is a drawing task. And here are the results. Girls in groups that were told that this is a geometry task, which is more often associated with something that boys are supposed to be good at, performed significantly worse and recreated the same image as when told that this is just a drawing task. So this is showing the power of stereotypes. However, with this in mind, there's a lot of quite simple things we can be doing to change this round. And the number one fix is to make women visible. So this is going back to the study which showed the huge difference in the number of questions being asked by men and women. In 2018, so the year where more questions were asked by women, what the conference organizers did was they really tried hard to ensure that equal number of panelists and chairs were male and female. And what they saw is that if the first question after presentation was asked by a female because the female was chair, or because the chair was asked to prioritize questions from a female audience member, the likelihood of subsequent questions being asked by another female was significantly higher. And the same applies to other minorities. And also, the same was shown by this other study, that if you have a all-male or white, not very diverse audience, the number of females willing or asking questions is much lower than in a situation where you have a diverse audience. And this one with more colors is showing that if you have a diverse audience, it is more likely that undergraduate students will, or those who are not senior, in senior roles will also be asking questions. So the more diversity you have, the higher diversity of people have the confidence to ask questions. And fix number 3 is make events more accessible. So what Kate touched on very well is often women are not as able to attend events in person because of family commitments, for example, and this excludes them. What COVID really helped with is forcing us to make use of online tools, and virtual conferences really kind of became the only way we could connect. But what this showed is that when we do move things online, there was a huge shift in who was able to and who did attend those conferences. So the move of conferences online really benefited females, but also people who might identify as genderqueer, trans, LGBTQ+, and so on. And this is not only because of online conferences being easier to attend if you have financial or family considerations, but also because, unfortunately, a lot of women and other minorities in science report discrimination at face-to-face scientific events. And also, interestingly, having hybrid or online events also opens up those events to, for example, undergraduate students or ECRs who may otherwise not have enough resources to attend. So overall, it's really good. And just to summarize, what we can all be doing is making women visible, kind of saying, hello, women scientists exist. So it's really nice to see kids at this event today. And when people ask you to be photographed for websites or similar, please do say yes. It could potentially be really, really important. And it's really important to have diversity in the committees that organize events, in the lineups of speakers, chairs, panelists, because if nothing else, it makes other people in the audience feel a little bit more confident and included. We can also educate males, white males, maybe especially in senior positions, of the role that they can be taking, of how they could be creating space and setting example with the way that they present themselves at conferences, and also considering kind of how we can use technology to make things more inclusive. Thank you.